Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to SOC Sidebar, brought to you by the Federalist Society Student Division, and in this episode, the Federalist Society Student Chapter at Florida State University. My name is Michael Bartnick. I'm the president of that chapter at FSU's College of Law. Each month, the Student Division and a rotating student chapter hosts a new SOC Sidebar featuring a judge being interviewed by a student chapter president about that judge's passion, hobby, or interest, and how it interrelates with the law. Tonight, our third SOC Sidebar features Judge Lisa Branch, who will discuss guns. Judge Branch was appointed to serve as a circuit judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit in March of 2018. From 2012 to 2018, she served as a judge on the Court of Appeals of Georgia. And prior to her judicial service, she spent her entire private practice career in commercial litigation at Smith, Gambrill, and Russell, LLP in Atlanta. From 2004 to 2008, Judge Branch was a senior official in the administration of President George W. Bush. She served first as the Associate General Counsel for Rules and Legislation at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and then as counselor to the administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. After graduating from law school, Judge Branch served as a federal law clerk to the Honorable J. Owen Forrester of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. She earned her JD with distinction from Emory University School of Law and her BA from Davidson College. Judge Branch, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael.
So just a quick note to our participants before we get started. At the end of this evening's interview, we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience. But in order to ask a question, you must be logged in as a participant in the Zoom webinar and use the Q&A feature. When we get to your question, I will read it aloud, so please get on Zoom and get those in if you are interested. And with that, we'll begin. Judge Branch, thank you again for being here. Can you start by telling us about your personal interest in firearms?
Sure. First of all, two things. Thank you to the Federalist Society for including me in this unique event. I've been involved with the Federalist Society for coming on 25 years now, and I've gotten used to sort of the way we do things. And right when I think I know exactly how we do things, Peter Redpath comes along and has an innovative idea to take us in a different direction. I'm usually skeptical of when Peter tells me these new ideas, and I am always wrong, and they are always fabulous. And this is one of those new ideas. And just yet again, he sort of keeps us all on our toes and keeps us entertained. So thank you to Peter Redpath and Federalist Society for this. But also thank you, Michael. I know you're the president at the Florida State University Law School Federalist Society chapter, and that means a lot to me too, even though I have no connection to the state of Florida other than the fact that I sit in the 11th Circuit. My career law clerk went to FSU undergrad and law school, and so for all the time that I've known her and worked with her, I get to hear about the Florida State Seminoles. And last term, I had two other law clerks who were fans of FSU. So that was a little too much FSU in my life last year, but always glad to be involved with the school yet again. As far as my personal interest in firearms, first of all, I'm a Southern girl, and growing up in the South, so many people have guns, and my family was no exception. I grew up in a house where my parents had a gun, and we, were told there were three girls growing up in my family. We were told where the gun was. The gun was loaded. We were told not to touch the firearm unless my father was there with us. And perhaps because it was a family of girls, we all listened and did not disturb it unless he was supervising us. So guns were never anything very strange to me. I respected the power of the firearm. I knew the purpose of the firearm was to keep our family safe, and I had a comfort level with it. But I wouldn't say that that's where my interest really grew from. It was really after I'd finished up school and moved out on my own, and sort of as a lot of women tried to decide what I was going to do to keep my home safe. So I started off with a baseball bat under the bed, and you quickly realize that ultimately, especially as a woman, what am I going to do with a baseball bat to really keep myself safe? And calling 911, particularly in a large city, is really just saying somebody's in my house, and by the time you get here, I might be dead. And so I started seriously talking with friends about firearms as a means of self-defense. And so I really just saw it from a practical perspective initially. And then as I started to get more comfortable with guns again as an adult and started going to the range to become more proficient, I realized I was sort of naturally a good shot. And so I think that led to an increased interest in it and a desire to keep training and keep going to the range and keep learning more about guns. And I do have to say, I consider myself a gun enthusiast, but not necessarily a gun expert. And I'm much more concentrate on the handgun side. While I do enjoy rifles and shotguns, I'm more of a handgun person. But then sort of the enthusiasm went on from there. And in fact, when I was at my law firm, every year at our annual retreat, they give out humorous awards. And one year I won exuberance in exercising Second Amendment rights. So I think at that point, my enthusiasm had certainly become fairly publicly established. But that's sort of a brief background on how I got to this point and why I chose this topic to talk about in the sidebar.
So when you started shooting, after you kind of became interested and realized maybe this was a skill you wanted to acquire, what was your strategy for getting a foot in the door? Did you get any professional instruction? Did you just kind of go to the range and figure it out on your own? What did that look like?
I was very fortunate that I had friends who owned a lot of guns and were patient with me. And these gentlemen would go with me to the range and would allow me to try out all the different calibers and see what worked best for me. I think sometimes men have different guns that they might enjoy more than women do, simply because our hand size is different. Not only am I a woman, but I actually have relatively small hands for a pretty tall woman. And just finding the right gun that I had a comfort level with, and then you start with that and just keep going with that, and then it can take you in different directions. But as I said, I was very fortunate to have a lot of friends who were willing to give of their time. I mean, they certainly enjoyed going to the range too. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of my former law partners. His name was Tim, and I always referred to him as the gun guy. He represented gun manufacturers. And he was just a dear friend of mine who really helped me take my interest a step further. Unfortunately, we lost him several years ago after a battle with cancer, but I really just point to him as the person that really took my interest and sort of focused it in a direction where I could really run with it from there.
That's sad to hear, but I suppose the legacy lives on every time you hit the range. That's a thoughtful story. So was it kind of smooth sailing along the way at that point, since you had good instruction, or do you have any kind of funny range stories you want to share and get out of the way here at the get-go?
Well, the unfortunate range story, first of all, there are so many rules of safety when you go to a range. And whenever you get a little bit too comfortable, you need to remind yourself there are very strict rules. And I made the mistake early on of violating one. I forgot to, you always wear ears and eyes. So you cover your eyes, you have the glasses to protect them, and you cover your ears to protect your ears. And I actually usually wear earplugs in addition to the earphones. And I had taken off the earphones, gone off the range. And because I still had the earplugs in, I thought my hearing was protected, didn't realize it, forgot to put them back on. And when I got on the range, a man next to me fired a rifle, and this was an indoor range. And my ear, oddly, the opposite ear, the sound hit the wall and bounced off, and my ear immediately filled with fluid. And so I had to go to the doctor, and luckily no hearing loss, but there was some damage to some parts of the ear. So that is an unfortunate story. And, obviously there are some stories that can take you in different directions. People can have mishaps that are terrible. This is a minor mishap, but certainly something I'm not very proud of, but a good reminder that, you know, guns are a very serious endeavor and the rules are there and you have to abide by all the rules at all moments in time, and you cannot get too casual with a firearm.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good reminder, and particularly in indoor ranges where the sound is just brutal. I mean, really magnified compared to shooting outside, which is maybe a little more comfortable. Um, so the right to keep and bear arms is deeply rooted in American culture and law. You obviously have a personal interest in firearms. So how does that personal interest help shape or inform your understanding of the right?
Well, I think that question is actually a very good time to reiterate what it means to be a judge, which is that on any number of topics, I have personal opinions. And that's sort of the personal hat that I wear. But the minute we step into the courthouse, the minute we assume the role of judge, our personal opinions do not inform our legal opinions. Our legal opinions, we do the research, we follow the law, we research the facts, we follow where the facts and the law take us. So I'm able to keep my personal opinions separate. But I would say that one of the, I guess I would instead pivot a little bit and just share two things that as my interest in firearms was developing, two of the things that I noticed. One, the man that I referenced before, Tim, the gun guy, unbeknownst to me at one of our range trips, he had taken photos of me firing. And unbeknownst to me, he also sent them around to the entire law firm. And once I sort of recovered from the horror of what he had just done, what was interesting is the phone calls that I got after that. And it was, and maybe because I'm a woman who was, you know, not everybody thinks women go to the gun range. I got a lot of calls from staff at the law firm, from women at the law firm, from older women at the law firm who said, you know what? I've been thinking about guns and I've been thinking about going to the range. What can you help me get there? What can you tell me? And so that was interesting to watch as my interest took off, that other women were similarly interested. And the second thing that I learned as my interest took off, we had the opportunity to undergo some training while we were firearms training while we were judges. And one of the things that I learned pretty quickly is when you have a gun and you are prepared to use it to protect yourself and others, you learn very quickly that determining when there is a legitimate threat in front of you is not always easy. This is certainly something that police officers go through, but if people have guns in their homes or are they carrying guns, just because there is a tense situation, it may not be a situation warranting the pulling out of your firearm. And so that's always a decision as a gun owner that you are kind of running through your head, because you don't want to pull the gun unless you're prepared to use the gun. And with the gun comes great responsibility. And it's a very nuanced area and it's very fraught as you're making some of these life and death decisions. But so those were sort of the two things that really impressed me about what goes on behind the scenes of exercising our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, I think concealed carry courses are universally really focused on making clear that, you know, you carry for self-defense. It's not so you can be a hero. It's not so you can intervene. This is for yourself, and you need to learn how to do it responsibly. And you know, I think that has to be the right approach. But I wanted to kind of follow up there. Obviously, American gun culture is prevalent among men and women. But it's one thing for a right to be deeply rooted in history and tradition, and another thing for it to be consistently exercised today. Do you have any thoughts on why the tradition has proven so sticky in America, particularly?
I think based on what I was just talking about, is that with gun ownership comes great responsibility. And not everybody exercises that responsibility in a good manner. And as long as there are going to be shootings and they're going to be on the news, and especially the mass shootings. And I think a mass shooting is defined of any time you have more than 3 people shot. Um, these are horrific incidents, and we're all, as a society, just heartbroken over these things. So it's how do you balance that you have this tragedy that comes about from guns, but then you also have a constitutional right to bear arms. And I think that is the tension in a nutshell. And I don't know, I have the sense that we're going to be debating that tension for a long time. There are no easy solutions. We see that. We see that legislators struggle to deal with this situation. And I just think that's sort of the source. It's a gun is a powerful thing, and it comes with great responsibility.
And so in dealing with that tension, of course, you're quite interested in firearms. Has that kind of influenced your perspective on other constitutional rights or constitutional interpretation more broadly?
Well, again, as a judge, my personal opinions are separate from what I do on the job as a judge. But I think as Americans, we have expectations about our Constitution. We expect that our rights are operating in the background at all times. I think we start to greatly appreciate those constitutional rights when we go out of the country and we realize those protections might not be there. In fact, we continue to insist that our constitutional rights have followed us out of the country. And I think that's where you run into the "but I'm an American, what do you mean?" situation. But I think uniquely with the Second Amendment, again, back in our country, and I think with the First Amendment, those are 2 constitutional rights that can affect our daily lives. The other ones are operating in the background, and I'm not suggesting they're not important, but our right to free speech, and for those of us who own guns and carry guns, those are the First and Second Amendments kind of operate in our daily lives. And so maybe to a certain extent, they become more concrete because we face them and enjoy them and exercise them so frequently. Whereas, again, the other ones, we expect them to be there at all times, but we may never, we may never actually confront those rights.
So again, this is obviously a highly polarized topic, and you're quite willing to address it here. Have you always felt that it was so easy to talk about your interest in firearms? What advice would you have for other people, perhaps navigating discussions on firearms in your personal or legal professional life?
As a judge, there is, there's a barrier again between sort of my personal views and my professional obligations as a judge. And so I don't have to opine on policy choices related to guns. And so that on some level keeps me out of the more complicated conversations. But I think also, so that makes it a little bit easier for me. Another thing that makes it easier for me as somebody who has always lived in the South, where there is a gun culture that it transcends political lines. I think people make assumptions about people who own guns or carry guns and think they belong to one political party. But if you come to the South, you cannot make that assumption. It transcends political lines to a surprising extent. And so I think it's a conversation that's much easier to have in the South. There are still some tensions. There are still people have very strong opinions about guns, emotions can run high, particularly if there is a recent, shooting tragedy. Of course, the emotions are going to run high, rightfully so. For all of us, that is a horrific thing that, when it happens, we hope that this won't happen again. And it's certainly something that we go through as a nation, and we will mourn that situation. But I do think it's easier for a Southerner to have that conversation. And I think that people in other regions of the country, I think they know I'm a Southerner, so they just make assumptions based on that and either don't want to have a conversation with me or they're comfortable having a conversation with me.
So, in what ways do you think responsible gun ownership can be rightly promoted? Obviously, you said you are obviously a judge, and your personal interests or opinions are kind of left at the door. But maybe outside of the courtroom, what do you think gun owners or enthusiasts can do to be good ambassadors of the interest in firearms?
First of all, there are so many firearms laws at the federal level, at the state level, and if everybody would be very careful and very mindful and abide by those laws, and if those laws could be enforced more fully, I think you might see some of the issues that have crept up might start to abate a bit. But I also think as a responsible gun owner, what you can do is you can continue to practice and go to the range and get proficient at it. And, don't have a gun around if you're drinking. I mean, be a responsible gun owner. If there are young children around, make sure that the gun is unloaded just so that there are no horrific accidents that occur. I will say that the Federalist Society has actually allowed me to do that second thing. We now have an annual event here in Atlanta. We do a shootout once a year, and we all go to the gun range, and we have all different guns, pistols, as well as long guns that we have the opportunity to practice with. And again, it just gets people more in the habit of doing that, of exercising, that right and becoming more proficient. But also, Federalist Society, I had the opportunity to speak at the Hillsdale College chapter, and my panelists and we went to their shooting range and spent the day. And that's where Olympic athletes train. And we had an instructor with us on an outdoor range. So I think just take advantage of those opportunities, go with that friend, go to the shootout if you're in Atlanta, and just, be familiar with the laws, but also get the practice in. I think those are two very important things.
Yeah, especially for beginners. I feel like a lot of gun owners are kind of apologists, and we want to convert other people to our side. So if you ask someone to come along and watch or even for help or instruction, I think more often than not, you're going to get a really positive reception there. So for any interested participants in the call here, are there any landmark Second Amendment court cases that you find particularly interesting or that you would recommend as a good place to start for interested parties in kind of learning about Second Amendment jurisprudence?
Well, I do have to start with a personal story. I was serving in the Bush administration when Heller came out. And there are, and maybe this shows the gun nerd that I am, but there are things that happen in life and you remember where you were. I remember where I was when Heller came out in June of 2008, and that was such a big deal. Everybody had been waiting on that decision, and just for those who don't know, but that's there was a DC ban on handgun possession in the home. In fact, I had moved up to DC and could not live in the District of Columbia at the time I moved up there in 2004. I had to live in Virginia, which was a more firearm friendly state. And then Heller came out and said that that DC ban on handgun possession in the home violated the Second Amendment. And that was just, I mean, everybody went crazy that day. It was definitely, with at least within the Federalist Society, talking with people, people were very excited about that. And then it just went on from there. You know, very shortly after that, the McDonald case came out and said the Second Amendment applies to the states. And then I guess probably the three most recent would be Bruin, and then Rahimi and Cargill. Cargill most recently with the bump stocks. But if you're looking to get started, I'm not, you know, telling you anything. These aren't things that you would have to look very hard to find these cases. These are sort of the landmark cases that really started in 2008.
Yeah, and some, if I recall correctly, some interesting Georgia state court citations in Heller that from the antebellum period kind of talk about the ignobility of concealed carry and how it was disfavored kind of in those times. It's somewhat of a relic now. I think concealed carry is much more popular, but really interesting to kind of dive into.
Well, and to that point, Georgia, relatively recently, was always pretty friendly as a carry state, but now it's a constitutional carry state. And so there is no need for a permit if you are lawfully allowed to possess a handgun. There are some restrictions. Can't go, obviously, airports and federal buildings present different situations, and churches, oddly, do. But so it also helps being in a state where there is constitutional carry. So,
Of course, we're maybe halfway there. But do you think the discipline and focus required in marksmanship and in safe gun handling have any parallels in the legal work that you do, or as in the legal work that you did in private practice, crafting arguments or writing judgments?
very much so. I think you have to have that focus. Again, I gave the terrible example of how stupid I was and forgetting to put the headphones back on. You make that mistake only once. But I think it's a good reminder that just as you have to be paying attention to all of the details when you are handling a gun, you have to be paying attention to all of the details when you are engaged in the practice of law, whether you are as a lawyer, as a judge, or whatever. This is a very precise endeavor. There are certainly big topics and big issues that are covered, but when you get down to it, you have to get down to the details. You have to know the details of the record. For me, the record below, the facts of the case. It's a confined record once we're up on appeal. When you're doing the legal research, you can look at the cases for broad concepts, but then you have to start narrowing down what is the context of this case. What is the specific statute that's being looked at? Is this a motion to dismiss? Is this a motion for summary judgment? What was the disposition of this case? How does it relate to mine? You're really looking at a lot of the nuances. So it is a very precise endeavor, the law, whether you're a lawyer or a judge. So there are definitely some parallels.
I'd like to focus that in, if I can, on young attorneys or perhaps incoming clerks. And I'm sure you're familiar with the weapons safety rules, but just for the audience, whenever you go shoot at any range, even if you're not at a commercial range, you're shooting publicly, before anybody loads up a weapon, shooters go through the 4 universal weapons safety rules. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Never point your weapon at anything you don't intend to shoot. Know your target and what lies beyond it, and keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Are there maybe parallels that you would recommend for those young attorneys? You know, a mantra of rules they should repeat every day before they begin their work?
I wish the rules for being a law clerk were so concise you could put them on a little placard and pin them on the door. In fact, when my clerks start, we hand them a manual. So the rules for law clerks are certainly more extensive than that, but just sort of off the top of my head, the things that jump out at me, and this first one applies certainly to a judge's chambers, but it also applies once you become a lawyer. But that's the importance of confidentiality. The discussions that happen in chambers and all the deliberations within a court, it is very important that our law clerks understand the duty of confidentiality to this court. It is how a court can function. But again, there is application that once you're a lawyer, you need to have the client confidentiality as well. And you have to be mindful of that, even if you're riding in an elevator, even if you're at dinner and you think you're talking in code, you really can't. You just have to abide by the confidentiality. One of the first things that I tell my clerks, other than confidentiality when they walk in the door, is I have two permanent staff, career clerk, my career law clerk and my judicial assistant. They are extensions of me. They are all my law clerks are to treat those two ladies as though they're an extension of me. And if they ever have a dispute with them, the term law clerks lose. And so it is in my term law clerk's best interest not to get into a dispute with my career law clerk and my judicial assistant. So the respect that's afforded to me and the other judges of the court needs to be afforded to my permanent staff as well. Other than that, the importance of meeting deadlines. Those are critical when the deadlines are set. It's important as a law clerk. It ensures that you can get that job done, but also all the other work that is ahead of you. We've talked already about the importance of precision in language, and as you're drafting opinions, as you're looking at the record below, as you're researching the case law. I think also it's important for law clerks to remember we're processing through, the 11th Circuit has a very heavy caseload. We have one of the heaviest caseloads in the country based on number of cases per judge. The 5th Circuit and the 9th Circuit were all kind of clustered there at the top. It's very important, though, to remember at the end of the day that every case is extraordinarily important. For the parties that are involved, this is the most important thing in their lives. And so don't ever lose sight of the individual nature of each case, even when you're working on multiple cases. And I think that's a good summary if I had to condense my law clerk manual into just a couple of statements.
I think that was pretty efficient. Thank you for the advice. We'll pivot here just a little bit, but I will add that in a couple of questions, we'll open up to audience Q&A if there are any questions. So if you have those, please get those in. But I wanted to ask, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about firearms among the general public? And is there any responsibility for the legal system to address these at all, or no?
So I think the biggest misconception that I see is the general public does not understand the difference between an automatic weapon and a semi-automatic weapon. I had hoped that the recent bump stock case, the Garland v. Cargill, which gave a pretty thorough explanation of the differences as it walked through what the function of a bump stock was. I think the fact that this confusion continues proves that people don't read judicial opinions. They read headlines about judicial opinions. The other misconception or thing that I guess perception that's out there that is not really based in reality is people talk about assault weapons, and I don't think they understand. I'm always curious and what people think an assault weapon is. And that kind of ties into the difference between an automatic weapon and a semi-automatic weapon. It's using terms that I think the general public doesn't really fully appreciate, and they'll point, for example, to an AR-15 and they think AR stands for assault rifle, which it does not. And just as a point of fact, it stands for Armalite. It's the manufacturer of the weapon. And I think there is a concern that there are rifles, such as the public is concerned that there are rifles such as an AR-15 that look scary. They look like they're in the movies. They're black. So that must mean there's something unique and terrifying about them. And I don't think they fully appreciate that just because a rifle is black, that if you're okay with a deer rifle, but you're not okay with an AR-15, you might need to actually go and do some research to get a better sense of the minuscule differences between these weapons, and that in fact some states don't allow you to hunt with AR-15s because the AR-15s aren't going to do as much damage and aren't going to immediately kill the animal. So there are humane reasons why you are not, some states won't allow you to hunt with an AR-15. So I guess I wish the public had a better understanding of those two issues. Does the legal profession have an obligation to clear that up? You know, I'm not sure if you're looking to judges, as I said, you know, you get opinions that do explain the differences, but people just aren't reading them. They're in the briefing, so the lawyers who are representing the companies that are being sued, the gun manufacturers, are explaining these differences in pretty great detail, but people just aren't reading the opinions in the briefs.
Now, on some of these more technical issues, do you think that perhaps law review articles or amicus briefs are perhaps more beneficial than they otherwise would be in a normal case to kind of drill down into some of the specifics on like how does a bolt carrier group work, you know, in the bump stock case, for example? Is that an area where more expertise is kind of welcomed
I
in
think
court?
certainly. I don't know that any more so than any other cases. With both, you know, with the amicus briefs and with the law review articles, you're working to educate the court. But we're here talking about how do you educate the public, and probably the best way to educate the public is going to be, can you get an article out into the media, to the mainstream media? That seems to be where everybody is digesting the news. I do want to correct one thing that I had said that may have been misleading when I was talking about AR-15s and hunting, that some states don't allow you to hunt with them for humane reasons. The states that I'm talking about are just, I'm talking about the restrictions on AR-15 for hunting, not restrictions on ownership of AR-15. So I just misspoke there.
Now, I would it would be a mistake not to follow up and ask, have you shot an automatic weapon?
Yes, as I have so automatic weapons, you can, for me, the way I had access to it was by going to a gun range. Automatic weapons are typically, there are exceptions, of course, but the way you're going to more often find them is in the hands of law enforcement or the military, or if you can get one at a gun range. And I was actually going through a firearms training for judges, so we had access to a machine gun. But more interestingly, for me, and this is probably falls into the category of, I learned what my limitations are. We had access to a handgun that was fully automatic. And if I thought through this, this would have worked out better. The instructor had been holding down the arm of everybody who was firing the handgun. And when it came to be my turn, for some reason that didn't happen. And as a woman who has a different arm strength than men do, when I started firing, without that arm brace, my arm just went straight up, and we're luckily outdoors, but there was a tree above me and I just cut the limb with the fire. I don't ever want to fire a machine gun pistol again, but a machine gun itself was more fun because I had more control over that. I certainly don't need it to come home with me, and certainly couldn't have it come home with me, but it was fun just to try it out.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an ordinary reaction, even for larger, like an AR platform rifle. People shoot those on fully automatic and think this, I don't need this. It's
It's
kind of
different.
useless. But I'll go back to Bruin, which you brought up earlier. It really gave us a hard reset on the framework for adjudicating Second Amendment disputes. And so now that you look out over the horizon post-Bruin, what do you think are some of the more interesting firearms-related legal issues that some of the interested parties here may want to pay attention to going forward?
Sure. And let me just clarify that I'm not going to, as a circuit court judge, I want to be careful about things that are percolating our way. But what I would say, and I don't think any of this is rocket science, the predictions I'm going to make, but what do I think is going to go to the Supreme Court? Certainly right now. In fact, they just had an oral argument on Garland v. Vanderstock, which is going to be the ghost gun regulation. The Garland v. Range, which was dealing with felons and Second Amendment rights, the Supreme Court just GVR'd it and sent it back for reconsideration by the Third Circuit in light of Rahimi. I think we're going to see some challenges making their way to the main court, the Supreme Court, about large magazine bans. I think silencer, suppressor bans by states could make their way there, and age restrictions on gun purchasing too.
Now, how about a suppressor or silencer? Have you ever shot a weapon with one of those attached?
I have not shot one, but I've been in the room with one. And that's actually something I think there's a massive misconception by the public. People think it's the way it is in the movies, that it just makes this little, and it's not. It just makes it it makes it so that you can tolerate it with your ears, that you're not doing damage. You can still hear the shot. It's just saving your ears. And as I get older, I am very protective of my ears, and anything I can do to minimize any further damage after the deer rifle incident, the better. But so a silencer or suppressor is not turning it into some criminal endeavor. It's not. It's just making it so that it's not going to cause as much damage.
So, penultimate question here. Do you have any other advice to give young lawyers or law students who are interested in the intersection of firearms and law, or just shooting more generally, and maybe are intimidated to get started?
As I said, first of all, just getting involved in the shooting aspect, find a friend who is well versed in guns. They're usually easy to pick out of the crowd. They don't keep that to themselves. And everybody I know that is interested in guns and going to a shooting range is more than happy to have you come with them, and we'll be able to walk you through so that you don't have to. I know that first time you go to a gun range, it's a little daunting, but having that friend go with you takes that out of the way. But if you're interested in getting involved with guns from a litigation perspective, I mean, there are law firms. My law firm was involved in that endeavor, and so you just need to look at gun manufacturers, see who their lawyers were. There are small firms, small boutique firms that do this, primarily. So I think that, and there are entities that are on, all sides of the gun issue that you can get involved with, public interest groups. So I think there are any number of ways that lawyers can become more professionally engaged in that endeavor.
Thanks. So finally, what do you hope to see in the future regarding the relationship between firearms, greater society, and the legal profession?
I guess just sort of going back to what we talked about is that I wish people would take the time to learn more about the guns before they start talking about it, to make sure. I mean, we have Google. Anytime I start to talk about any topic, I Google just to make sure I've got my terminology right. I wish people would do a little bit of research before they start having a firearms debate. And again, just to go back to the theme that I've been talking about throughout this talk, invite a friend. Forget having to put the burden on the person who's interested in going to a firearms range to approach you. But if you're somebody that's comfortable going to a range, ask your friend, say, hey, I'm going tomorrow. Would you be interested? I mean, so they say no, then ask somebody else the next time.
Great. Well, I am seeing kind of a lot of specific, maybe legal questions in our audience Q&A. So I'm going to bypass that, and thank you for your time here, Judge Branch. But before we let the audience go here, I need to say that Our next SOC sidebar is going to be held next month in December, and will feature Judge Tim Timkovich, who is going to be discussing skiing. So make sure to tune into that. Judge Branch, thank you once again for your time. This was wonderful. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And thank you to all of our audience members who showed up to watch.
And Michael, thank you. I did enjoy every moment of it.
Thanks, Judge.